Lieutenant Beckenbauer pushed forward into the dark and the gloom. The men of the new Antioch 3rd Assault Company spread out around him. He could already get the faintest stench coming from the abandoned monastery up ahead. This place had been a house of God, of heavenly worship. It had now fallen to ruin and desecration, a hive for evil and a warren of sin. His men were eager to get stuck into the fight, and he had gladly accepted this assignment. Ridding Crete of the denizens of hell would mean keeping Greece under the control of the church, and then taking back the Levant and driving the demonic hordes and their pathetic human worshippers through the gates of Inferno forever. The plan was easy, as the monastery had fallen to rot, decay, and disease. Reports stated it regularly spawned new swarms of maggot-ridden thrall, so getting in and destroying anything they found was paramount. Scouts had reported the presence of large growths all around the monastery, like hideous eggs, so they had plenty of explosives with them. As they crept forward, closer and closer to the monastery, the stench grew stronger until eventually it threatened to make him gag. Foul odor. "We must cleanse this holy place, brother," Siegler, the cleric, whispered from the inky darkness to his right. The man had endured a close call a few weeks prior, coming face to face with a demonic beast in the trenches, but managing to make his escape. He didn't seem affected by it, his faith in the Lord absolutely unshakable. It had been God's will that he live, and it was God's will that all of them were here, now. As they hit the outskirts of the monastery, nearing the broken walls and dilapidated buildings, they had come upon a strange sight that Beckenbauer was not expecting. All along the ground was a strange webway of seaweed, almost like a frayed carpet in some grand lord's house. The deep blood-red colour was almost black, and when they stood upon it, water was pushed forth as if from a sponge. He could smell the salt in it, but it was almost acrid and burnt. Deep inside the monastery, in the heart of the pulsating rot that powered this terrible place, Executor Crandall's eyes snapped open, and a mournful low buzz began to sound. They had been sent to guard this place, sowing a lattice of seaweed all around the outskirts of the ruins, and someone had stepped on it like a fly on a web. He could feel the vibrations of heavy feet, and he knew what they had come to do. The eggs, the next strain of the Black Grail that they would be unleashing upon this island. It would boil here until breaking point, then roll across Europe like a storm, turning millions of people into molten, rotten lakes of flesh. Looking around, the plague knight Sorvald was already awake, pulling herself out of the depths of the throbbing organic gristle of the central hive. Crandall aimed a hard kick straight into the side of the head of the still sleeping corpse-guard Blubbermaw. Wake or die, there's work to do. Blubbermaw dragged himself off the ground, but not before Crandall got another kick in, this time landing on his ribs. The creature was slow, stupid, and a nightmare at sea, but it could sing the tune and it could fight, and that was enough. "Someday, Crandall, you won't get that foot back," Blubbermaw drawled, slowly spinning the hand crank of his hurdy-gurdy. Water leaked from it, and it was encrusted with barnacles and rotten seaweed, but still it played the tune. Crandall reached out into the parasite embedded in all his thrall. The parasite ate the tongue, sitting in the head and waiting for human flesh to devour, but it allowed him to control the thrall, or at least to give them a rough mental push in the directions that he wanted them to go for the most part. They felt no inconvenience, as most of them were practically mindless, and the ones who were not were destined to be. He implanted a single word into their mind, then snatched up his shield and polearm and strode into the cold, desolate corridors of the monastery. He repeated the word, harder this time, putting urgency behind it, aware what would happen if Beelzebub's plan was interrupted. Kill. Beckenbauer was not quite prepared for the sight that awaited them at the monastery. The walls were cracked and broken, and disgusting, pulsating masses of flesh were everywhere. They reminded him of eggs, pregnant with potential horrors, and the stench from them was horrific. The bell tower had been torn down, and the bell itself lay on its side, a slurry of molten human flesh seeming to ebb and flow around it. No need to wonder what had happened to the inhabitants of the monastery then. He signalled for all his troops to move up, and instantly they made for the eggs. They had brought numerous satchel charges with which to destroy them, and he planned on using them all. Kruger stayed with him as the fire team of Trausch and Yeoman Bruns moved forward towards the bell, placing the charge on the egg located there. Bruns broke off, heading to another egg just to the south. Meanwhile, to the north of their position, the other fire team moved west towards another egg. Beckenbauer and Kruger, his accompanying shock trooper, held the centre, and Siegler moved towards the gaping hole in the wall that led to the decaying corridors of the monastery. On the far side of the monastery, Crandall clicked out a series of commands with his own parasite, moving the thrall into position to protect the eggs. The thrall could die and easily be replaced. He had a ship filled with potential hosts in the slave galley. Crandall, the Plague Knight Lady Sorvald, and Corpse Guard Blubbermaw all moved forward toward the oncoming assault squad. They could not tell exactly where they were, only that they were here. They had already moved past the protective lattice of seaweed that surrounded this place, so speed was of the essence. Blubbermaw began to crank the handle, and the cold, discordant notes of the song began to echo off the uncaring stone of the monastery. Blubbermaw's watery, nasally voice began to ring out, and Craptle and Crandall grinned as behind the thrall took up the song. What in God's holy light is that? The notes of the song had reached Beckenbauer, and he turned to Ziegler. Ziegler just shrugged. Does it matter? We know what's out there. Does it matter if there's music? Beckenbauer looked around as his men planted charges on the demonic eggs, realizing that they didn't seem phased at all. If the intention of the song, currently echoing down the halls, was to scare them, then it had failed in its task. Odder still, he thought he could hear the low mumble of singing, but he put that out of his mind. Trausch moved away from the hideous bell just as the satchel charge went off, too close for comfort, splashing ichor and gore everywhere. "Careful," Beckenbauer called out, voice as low as he could make it, yet still be heard. Trausch and Burns moved south to meet up with Kruger and help him with the other egg, and the shock trooper and yeoman to the north continued to attempt to place the charge in such a way that it would actually crack the cursed thing. In the halls of the corridor, Sorval pushed forward, eager for battle. She is obsessed with advancement within the Black Grail, eager to follow in the rancid footsteps of the great hegemon Ursina Rex, and bring as much disease and corruption as possible to the worlds of men. Up the corridor, Siegler sees her step through the doors as he climbs the small pile of rubble and looses a shot at her. Sorvald gets her shield up and feels the round bounce off it, then grins beneath her helmet. It's time to kill. Beside Sorvald, Crandall pushes hard down the corridor. He has to get to the attackers before they can do too much damage. He sees the cleric firing at the Plague Knight and lifts his own foul shotgun, sending a blast of rancid buckshot down the corridor. It peppers the walls, but he knows a few buckshot made it into the flesh of the cleric, and that can be enough, given time. To the north, an explosion and a viscous splash of ichor landing on cold stone. Another egg gone before the liquid inside has the chance to properly enchant, drawing on the power of Beelzebub to become Black Grail essence. Meanwhile, Blubbermaw pushes up the corridor, knowing his duty despite his dislike for Crandall, bellowing the words now as his distorted fingers nimbly fly over the delicate strings of the instrument. Hoist the sails and swab the decks. When we're done with man, then the angels are next. It's all disease and it's all grime. The Rock King drags him down. Beckenbauer steps up to follow Siegler, knowing the cleric has a habit for finding the biggest evils on the battlefield. As he reaches the horrific bell and stares down the corridor into the monastery proper, he raises his gun and fires. On instinct, he could pick out the leader of the group, although he is still struggling to process what he is seeing. His enemies are obviously the demented followers and thralls of the Black Grail, but he can make out the long decayed finery and silk of pirates. He fires a shot at one wearing a captain's hat, and he knows that his aim is true. Yet the shot doesn't land on his intended target. Blubbermaw, showing a speed that until now has been dormant, manages to get himself between the shot and his captain. He looks up into Crandall's eyes as blood and pus start to ooze slowly from where the bullet hit him in the leg. "Bastard," he says. knowing full well that Crandall left himself open to the shot, knowing that his bodyguard oath won't allow Blubbermaw to let the captain suffer any wound that he could stop. Crandall just smirks, making that strange chittering and clicking sound that means he is talking to his thralls. Behind them, in the gloom, the buzzing of wings starts to reverberate with purpose, and the rasping, rattling voices of the thralls continue the song, and fear begins to rise up in the hearts of the 3rd Assault Company. As Trausch and Bruins pass the gap in the wall heading south, they see a collection of hideous creatures inside. The Executor, Plaguebearer and Corpse Guard are all advancing down the hall, making their way towards the Lieutenant and the Cleric. The Shock Trooper uses their advantageous position to throw a grenade in, and a violent explosion rips through the room. Crandall, too busy throwing barbs at Blubbermaw to notice the incoming attack, gets blown off his feet, picking up numerous small injuries that surely would have been worse had it not been for his armour, and the Plague Knight also suffers some minor wounds. Bruins, the yeoman, follows up with another grenade, but foul magic is at play now that the element of surprise is gone, and it seems to rust away to nothingness mid-flight, the sickening stench of burning salt filling the air. Incensed at having been caught off guard, Crandall gets to his feet and bellows. He raises his putrid shotgun and fires, once again peppering the cleric with buckshot. He can feel the infection starting to grow in his target now, and he longs for the kill. Grabbing his wicked-looking fishing spear, he charges the cleric, lashing out with a lightning-fast blow, trying to behead the man. The cleric, despite being injured, is expecting this, ducking off to the side and taking a glancing wound to the shoulder as the tip of the spear bounces off the wall behind him. Ziegler snarls, moving forward under the spear as it cuts through the meat of his shoulder. You can feel the wound burning just like the buckshot that peppered his side and leg. You can feel weakness building within him, but for now his righteous fervour is driving him on. He lashes out with his bayonet, feeling it find a gap in the armour of the monstrous creature in front of him. The damn song and the cursed music coming from these things they are fighting is echoing harder off the walls now, and Ziegler can feel the room beginning to spin as the burning builds inside him. The illness within isn't enough to stop Ziegler from turning and screaming to his men, however. Onward Christian soldiers marching as to war, with the cross of Jesus going on before. Behind him, Crandall smashes an armoured fist into the side of his head and the cleric slumps to the floor, but his words have already burned themselves into the hearts of his men. Seeing Ziegler go down, and the corpse guard advancing up the corridor, Beckenbauer steps across the hallway, firing twice as he goes. One of the shots tears into the sickly flesh of the creature, but it barely seems to notice and never stops playing that infernal instrument. Back down the corridor, Sorval jumps neatly through the hole in the wall that the passing New Antioch troops used to throw grenades at them. Surprising them with her agility, she is on them in a heartbeat, her polearm snapping out like a hideous viper wounding the yeoman. From the north, Trausch and Lohmuller, who have finished dealing with their target egg, hurry south, desperate to help their allies. Trausch can see the corpse guard and throws a grenade at him, but it goes wide, exploding harmlessly after bouncing down the wrong corridor. Crandall clicks and clacks, and now the thralls come, descending from the sky on tattered wings that should never have been enough to hold them aloft. The yeoman, who had just been wounded by the Plague Knight, finds himself under assault from a winged horror, suffering more injuries. Beckenbauer is trying to figure out his next move when a disgusting winged abomination lands beside him, pawing at him with hands that used to be human. He pushes it away, trying to bring his weapon to bear as another one lands nearby. His heartbeat starts to quicken as he can hear the monsters to his south moving further up the hall, closer, coming in his direction. He has heard 3 satchels explode so far, but knows they need to destroy more of the vile eggs before they can leave this place. As Crandall, captain of the rotting Promedian, stares down at the slumped body of Ziegler the cleric, he joins in the song. Lo they go to the circles below. The black Grail knows and the black Grail grows. Lo they hide, for their loved ones have died. Now join them in the mire. Shock Trooper Trausch, watching his friend Yeoman Bruins under assault from the Plague Knight and the Thralls, lashes out, smashing his club into the soft connection at the Plague Knight's neck, just as Bruins lands a bayonet slash that glances off the heavy shield. The damn music is unnerving them, and they cannot seem to find fortune in this fight, but still they keep their faith. Thinking the cleric is dealt with, Crandall looks to move up the turn in the corridor and the lieutenant lurking there, but as he does he feels a sharp stabbing pain through his ankle. The cleric has lashed out with his blade, driving it through a gap in his armour and into the supple flesh beneath. Siegler surges to his feet, firing almost point blank with his SMG as Crandall unloads another blast from his shotgun. Bullets and buckshot fill the air as both are hit, but Siegler definitely comes out of it the worst. His body is racked by pain, his flesh feels like it is trying to burn off his bones, but still he will not stop. He must win the day, for the Almighty, and for his men. Bruins, still locked in combat with the Plague Knight, doesn't even have time to duck as the monstrous creature reaches out and grabs him, ripping off his helmet and smashing the shaft of her polearm into his face. He goes down instantly, landing in a crumpled heap on the floor. Just as Beckenbauer fears he might be overrun and is preparing to take as many enemies with him as he can, Trausch and Lohmuller arrive from the north. Trausch smashes into a thrall, beating it down with his club until it finally stops the sickening singing. Lohmuller climbs atop the disgusting bell, loosing a shot at the corpse guard, but it once again seems to eat the wound like it's nothing. Sorvald stares down at the battered yeoman at her feet, feeling saddened that he went down so easy, and he turns to stare at the shock trooper that remains. More thralls arrive, lashing out at him, grabbing at his armour and weapons, and the Plague Knight cackles, cold and piercing. Beckenbauer is filled with rage now. He has to get his men out of here. The cacophony of buzzing and singing and haunting music is filling his ears. He drives his bayonet into a nearby thrall. To the south, Kruger has watched the Plague Knight seemingly kill his friend Bruins, and Shock Trooper Trausch is getting swarmed by flying enemies, with two of them attempting to hold him as the Plague Knight readies a final strike. With no other choice, he takes out a grenade and throws it. He has to trust in New Antioch engineering to save the day, and when the smoke clears, two of the thralls are down, one of them permanently, but the Plague Knight and Trausch seem to be fine except for a couple of minor wounds. Despite the risk and the seeming payoff, yet more thralls arrive over the wall, the buzz of wings and the hideous song still echoing all around them. Fainter now, surely, as the cursed choir has had the wings of several members clipped, but present and pressing all the same. Back in the central corridor, Blubbermaw has his sights on the lieutenant. Eager to take out a high-ranking enemy, he cranks the hurdy-gurdy hard, mimicking the awkward walk of those who are used to the rise and fall of waves who suddenly find themselves on land. He can see the lieutenant's eyes grow wide at first at his pantomime, then narrow with anger at being mocked. He sings the words and the song is almost done. He can hear Crandall singing along and a rasping of the thralls, and even Sorvald has joined in now, her voice oddly soft and beautiful for one so twisted. O'er the waves and beneath the stars, when the fighting is done, we'll count the scars. It's all disease till the end of time. The Rock King drags him down. Kruger is finding it hard to think. The song is filling his mind now. He can imagine cold, dead hands grasping at his legs, dragging him beneath waves of sickening sludge and liquid flesh. He takes out another grenade, throwing it again at the group of enemies swarming his fellow soldier. What choice does he have? What else can he do? The explosion goes off, and this time the armour of New Antioch has taken too much damage, and shrapnel wounds bloom like flowers all over Trausch. But two of the thrall that were hammering at him are now down. Kruger piles into combat with the Plague Knight, swinging hard, trying to drown out the damn singing. He can hear her voice coming from beneath the face guard of her helmet, and it's beautiful. Nothing of hell should sound like that. She deflects the blow with ease, letting it glance off her shoulder armour as she refused to be distracted from the mess of wounds at her feet. She stops singing for long enough to laugh, exulting in the moment, then drives her polearm through the body of the shock trooper at her feet, pinning him to the floor. Beckenbauer is still fighting for his life, and he cuts down another thrall, taking it out of the fight before lashing out at yet another with his bayonet. They won't seem to stop coming, but he can't relent. How can he fail like this under the eyes of God? All around him, grenades are growing off, men are screaming, and it feels like for every enemy they cut down, another appears. The buzzing of wings, and the twisted mockery of music, and the awful dirge clawing at his mind, filling his thoughts with the sickening sense of salt and a dead sea. As the cleric once again tries to rise, Crondall roars. This man will not stay down. Is this the futile fate of the holy, to suffer and to suffer without end? He blasts him again with the shotgun, and the armour is not enough to stop it this time. The cleric finally falls. Blubbermaw has reached the lieutenant, and he lashes out with a fist, punching the man with a blow that feels like a hammer striking an anvil. Beckenbauer's vision is swimming, and he can barely think. He has to get his men out of this place. He has no choice. He signals to the shock trooper and the yeomen, who use grenades to keep their enemies at bay. When they start to fall black, the Black Grail does not follow, seemingly content to protect the remaining eggs in the monastery rather than inflict further loss and injury on the 3rd Assault Company. Crondall watches them go, not caring to fight further. The day is won, and he is tired from his personal war with the damn cleric. The man had strength, no doubt, but he was a fool. Why be strong and fight for the weak? Why have power and use it to protect the powerless? He walked along the outer wall of the monastery, instructing the thrall to fall back. All of them had suffered badly during the fighting, but thrall meant nothing to him. He'd replaced them, same as always. He met Sarvald as she stood over the seemingly still living shock trooper, pinned to the earth by her rusty polearm. Crondall knelt, ripping off the man's helmet. The eyes that stared back at him were filled with hate, unbroken despite his injuries and proximity to death. It seems your crew forgot you, lad. Sorry to say, it only gets worse from here. Crondall stood up and noticed Blubbermaw was still grinding out the song, laughing and jeering. The fat fool never knew when to shut up. He knelt down and grabbed the shock trooper's ankle, then set off into the heart of the monastery, back to the pulsating nest of decay that resided there, dragging the unfortunate man behind him. Come on, lad, we'll make a pirate out of you yet. As he disappeared into the dark, he sang the song, the words echoing off the walls behind him, the last evidence that anything had happened here at all. Crest the waves, for there's nothing to save. We're scallywags, beggars and thieves and knaves. When the Black Grail calls, through the storm and the squalls, you'll join us in the mire.